Hello again, everyone. Dave Benson here with the Center for Personal Protection and Safety. I want to continue our conversation about violence prevention, particularly in a work environment. And as part of that discussion, I want to provide a little overview and kind of the genesis and history of workplace violence prevention and intervention as a discipline. You know, it wasn't that long ago, once upon a time, maybe 20 years more, where workplace violence prevention wasn't even considered. It was an afterthought. Not that it wasn't occurring, but there wasn't a great deal of concern. We were focusing on things like sexual harassment, which we still focus on and is still very important, and it has a government mandate response capability, but nonetheless, we didn't make that leap into behaviors of concern, why people behave the way they do, and the likelihood of violence or extreme violence behavior happening as a result of some of these incidents. And then, of course, towards the end of the 1990s, we had a watershed event known as Columbine. And even though that was part of the school system, it was a wake-up call for kind of society in general, and certainly was the beginning of searching for remedies in earnest for prevention within schools, within workplaces, within organizations, and yes, even within houses of worship. Because houses of worship are not immune from acts of targeted and intended violence. Kind of the next step in this genesis was prevailing best practices. We had organizations that realized these were challenges, both across healthcare and education, and houses of worship, faith-based organizations of all types, nonprofits, whatever it might be, and they got together and kind of discussed prevailing best practices, what worked for them organizationally, what did not work, and what were some of the challenges. The next step was ASIS putting together a committee to discuss the challenges of workplace violence prevention, and they came up with guidelines. And while they were not enforceable, it was some of the very same people, some of the best and brightest, if you will, that got together and came up with the beginnings of standards, even though they were under guidelines. The need for training throughout an organization, the need to have a capability to manage and assess this threatening behavior. And then when you do have an event of targeted or extreme violence, how do you deal with that? And then how do organizations recover? All these parts of the readiness, response, and recovery that we've been talking about at the center for an awful long time began to take shape. Ultimately, in September of 2011, we had two seminal documents that came out. The American National Standard on Workplace Violence Prevention, and then the OSHA Directive on Workplace Violence. Both of them provided infrastructure guidelines and kind of the go-to and how-to of putting together a comprehensive violence prevention and intervention program. And so it has continued to grow as a discipline and blossom. And even though we don't have a national standard per se in the United States on workplace violence prevention, these documents have been the gold standard and continue to be for organizations when they have liability situations, they go to court, what should their programs look like? And this is certainly something that we at the center have benchmarked over the years. Moving forward to 2020, we saw an upgrade to both documents, both the OSHA updated directive, but more specifically to the ASIS, from a national standard to an international standard, workplace violence and active assailant prevention, intervention, and response. One of the things that has stayed consistent and hard and fast throughout this evolution of workplace violence prevention and intervention is that certain things need to be in place to have a robust program. Certainly CPPS remains on the forerunner of this by dealing with what they call their pyramid, the 5 tiers. The first tier being policies, plans, and procedures. Second tier is workplace violence prevention and intervention training for all employees. The third tier is a deeper dive, more advanced training for managers and supervisors and leaders. Tier 4, which is something I spearhead for the company, which is behavioral threat management and threat assessment. And that also includes crisis management exercises. And then finally, Tier 5, making sure that executives within an organization understand what's being done from the bottom of the pyramid up and understanding their role as they support workplace violence prevention and intervention strategies. That has become the basis for CPPS's Safe Workplace certification. And you're going to hear a lot more about that in coming videos.